was just donating to
Hey,
the RNC.
we're going. We're on. We're live. Welcome to the NPC Sports Podcast. I am Ben. I'm joined by Dakota and Logan, as usual. It is the end of draft weekend, which also means it is the start of allergy season for me. So I apologize for my red eyes, for my scraggly throat, for my sniffles, and I'll probably have some ridiculous sneezing fits. As you guys know, no one quite sneezes in triplicate like I do.
Triplicate. It's your eightlicate. There's never anybody worse at Nesson than your sneeze attacks. It was insane. They freaked me out pre-COVID. I didn't even need the context of COVID to be worried about particles flying through the air. Like it was just chaos with you.
I always
Ah,
I always sneeze into my elbow. I knew how to sneeze.
you were you were ready for that moment in society.
That's true.
Yeah, I will say my internet crapped out for a good chunk of that, and I just caught the part about Ben Sniffles and was very much like, yep. I was transformed back to the Nesson offices at 480 Arsenal.
I will say I don't want to name names, but there's a well-established Boston sports media figure who, at least for me, when I think of this person, I only think of them in terms of how much they sneeze in press boxes. This person, seriously, Ben, is worse than you, where you'll be at Gillette and it's just like 9 in a row. And it'll happen like twice during the game. I don't want to name names, but I'd like to.
How dare people have immune systems?
Yeah, that means it's working, right? That means they're fighting off the toxins.
Yeah, I think the big problem is those of you who don't sneeze loudly enough. If we're gonna turn this around, yeah, absolutely. Those of us who have loud sneezes, we're the master race, and the other rest of you are gonna succumb to the germs and things sooner when the end of days come.
I have the condition where when I'm exposed to sunlight, I sneeze. When I first walk out to sunlight, I almost invariably sneeze. And I
can
have
tell.
an almost 1-year-old who does the same thing. When I open the shades in the morning, the first thing he does every day is sneeze. I'm like, wow, that is my child. So there you go. Some good sneeze talk this morning.
Yeah, great sneeze talk. Yeah.
All right, NFL draft was nothing to sneeze at, especially if you're a Patriots fan. So we're gonna do something a little bit different today. Instead of just kind of walking through some talking points, each of us has prepared a take. It doesn't necessarily have to be a hot take, but it is a take that none of us have heard as of yet. So we'll go through, we'll each share it, and our lovely viewers will get to see the other two of us react in real time. So I'll get us kicked off with my take the 2025 Patriots draft. And, one thing that I like to do with this podcast is to be conscious of the fact that in sports, these things are covered, run, played, coached by human beings, by people. And sometimes you tend to forget that. You see them as numbers in a box score or names on a roster, that sort of thing. And I had thought about Elliot Wolf as a human, as a person, watching his media availabilities during and after this draft. Because one really big criticism that maybe I and other people had last year with him was that when he talked to the media, he seemed very uncomfortable, unprepared, unqualified was maybe the assumption that you got from that. And this draft, he sounded like a completely different human being. And it took me back to times where I think many of us have been in this position where you're an employee, a manager, whatever it might be, and you're put in the position of having to justify, explain decisions that you don't really agree with, that you don't understand the decision-making process behind, and you end up sounding insincere, stupid, unprepared, all those sorts of things. And watching Elliott Wolf in this draft, I kind of had the feeling that that was the case for him last year. That a lot of the impressions that I personally got might have been unfair or were unfair. Were unfair because he was dealing with so much stuff behind the scenes that many of us, some of which we were aware of, some of which we were not, that he was having to go out there and sound like an idiot. Um, and this time around, like, he sounded like someone who understood the process. He understood the plan, that he had had conversations with intelligent people about why they were making these decisions. And when he was asked questions specifically about why this, why that, his answers were much more specific. Like, he sounded smarter because he was a guy who understood what he was doing and he like believed in what he was doing. So that was kind of like my number one thing is like Elliott Wolf, the human being, sounded like a more comfortable, more prepared man, executive throughout this draft.
It's
Yeah,
nice
so
that the Patriots aren't. I'll just be quick, Dakota. It's nice the Patriots aren't needlessly being coy with his title this year. Like that didn't help last year's. No, it was like the draft was approaching, and they're like, "Is Elliott Wolf actually running this?" And they wouldn't say. So I do think having some clearly delineated things that they're not hiding from for whatever reason, like they were last year, is a sign of maturity from the organization.
yeah, so for me, it's a couple of things. I think there certainly was an element of not making it up as he was going along, but certainly not having like conviction or confidence uh, in whatever process the Patriots were doing last year. Like I remember, like one that stands out to me was during training camp. I think it was Greg Bedard asked Elliott Wolf at the. It was the only of time we got to speak to Elliott Wolf during training camp, like on the fields. Asked him about what was going on at tackle. The fact that at that point in the summer they had put so many different guys at both tackle spots. Caden Wallace was like running with the backups, then he'd be like the top left tackle, and then Chuks Corf would be out there. It was all over the map. And I forget exactly what the question was, but Bedard asked Elliott Wolf, and he kind of had a really like snippy bullcrap response. Like he basically said like, "Oh, Caden Wallace has been running at left tackle," when the reality is he played like 2 snaps. It was a disingenuous answer, and so I think there were times like that where it seemed like he was he didn't really necessarily know what the coaches, what Mayo, what the offensive coaching staff, and what Scott Van Pelt, like what they were doing day in and day out. No one was on the same page. Maybe that was a byproduct of, the reporting that Jonathan Kraft was actually kind of pulling the strings as far as like the front office leadership. So I think to Ben's point, there was definitely a lot of that going on. But the thing that always stood out to me about him last year was he just seemed nervous. Like just that's it, to me. And I don't necessarily know if that has to mean anything beyond that. Like I remember the first time I saw him speak, he was always really fidgety with his fingers, kind of like messing with them and looking out to the side, and he'd have to like pause himself and say stuff. And you could feel it in person that he was nervous. And I think that came across a lot during that press conference at the table at the combine. He seemed really nervous, and it might have been that it was just that was a symptom of not many people being on the same page. But I came away from all of that thinking he just was nervous during media availabilities. And, the Patriots PR team puts a lot on these guys' plates before they go to microphone. They sort of inundate them with, here's what you're probably going to get asked. Here's how you probably should answer it. Here's what everyone's talking about. And yeah, I think no matter who it is, whether it's a Elliott Wolf or a player, a lot of them get up there and you can see the gears turning and they're trying to think while they're talking if they're doing it right. And some of them get more nervous than others. And I always thought he came across as very nervous. And so I agree with you, Ben, that this time around he seemed to be much more comfortable, both with what the Patriots are doing and just in his own skin.
Because that's like that nervousness is a byproduct of the not believing or not having faith in what you're saying, sort of thing. I mean, you guys can, we've been in meetings before, and you guys have asked me questions about a certain thing, and I, you see me pause and kind of like, okay, wait, what was said in the managers meeting that I'm supposed to respond to this? So like he's probably going back in his head and saying, okay, what did Stacey James, like when he was preparing me, because I don't want to answer this comfortably and say
Right.
our coaching staff doesn't know what it's doing. Like, I have to talk about, we're administering a process to capitalize on the, blah, 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 blah.
And I also don't want to be Bill
Yeah.
about it because I've just done all offseason saying we're no longer the hard ass Patriots. We're going to be less like Bill, this and that. And so I think they were all uncomfortable. And remember, that was Elliot Wolf's first time in that kind of role. He'd always been sort of an assistant style GM or a lead scout where you're not required to do media availabilities. So he looked and sounded like a rookie a lot last year when he was doing it.
I do. I don't want to harp on the point that he didn't really have a role for a good chunk of last offseason, but I think that is part of an overarching thing that there was no structure last year. Like for a team that had written into someone's contract that he was going to replace the head coach, it's like they had no plan for once that actually happened. It was like, all right, Mayo will take this title and then we'll go from there. And it literally feels like every decision was made in a vacuum almost. Like think about last year's draft. It's like he knew he needed to pick Drake May. And then after that, it was like, well, let's see who we can get. And that's why you ended up with Jalen Polk in the second round. And what was it? Javon Baker was a fourth rounder. So this year, it seemed like maybe this is the Vrabel effect beginning in earnest that we always hear about, where it's like it seems like things are a little bit more um, organized, and at least like there's like this is going to sound like corporate jargon, but it almost sounds like this change we're seeing in Elliot Wolf is because he's being empowered to actually do his job. Like I can almost visualize last year him and Gerard Mayo sitting in a room together after they start being like, who's going to speak first? Like no one knew who was in charge. Mayo didn't know what direction he wanted to take the team in. So at least with Vrabel, whether it works out or not, it's a guy who has someone used the word conviction earlier, someone who actually has a vision, a plan, and it feels like they set out to do that. Like we sat here last week and talked about, we want them to just have a normal draft. Don't go off the board, fill your needs, all these things. I think that's the top line point of the draft, which they addressed a ton of needs and they made true decisions. So I think there's a lot less of the flying by the seat of your pants, which is there's just structure that has clearly been lacking, and that seems to be returning now.
Yeah, and the last point I'll make on it is, I think then this isn't like inside knowledge or anything. I'm just sort of speculating that, last year he had like Elliot Wolf's, his forte is player evaluation, whether that's on the college level scouting or whether that's going out and poring over film at the NFL level and evaluating players and then their potential fits with whatever team he's working for. Like that's his thing. Um, working out all the contracts and being a GM and everything that entails, which is about a lot more than just scouting. I mean, he's obviously held some of those responsibilities, but not quite to that level. Like he is first and foremost like a really strong player evaluator. And I think it was clear last year, a lot of this other stuff was put on his plate, and he probably would have been more able to handle it if he also wasn't babysitting Gerard Mayo as much as he was. So it just seemed like his head was spinning a lot. Whereas this year, it seems like, it's not in title, but Vrabel clearly is the GM head coach to some degree. And Ryan Cowden probably is above Elliot Wolf, maybe not in title. It's probably more clear to them behind the scenes. And it seems like, just from me looking outside in, it seems like Elliot Wolf has just been able to focus on what he's really good at this offseason, which is just player evaluation across the board. And so, maybe he's just more comfortable with that, and that's why he seems more comfortable in the interviews.
Perfect. All right, let's roll right into Dakota's take. Dakota, what was your first reaction looking at this draft?
My take is I officially hate the Joe Milton trade. I
Explain.
hate, I was reserving judgment. I didn't like it at the time either, just because I was like, I I wasn't necessarily taking the bait that they could have gotten a third round pick, though I think maybe that was possible. But in the fifth round pick from the Cowboys just didn't feel like enough. But I thought, if nothing else, wait until the summer when QB needs emerge, and then you have more leverage and you can get more out of teams. We saw it last year with Matthew Judon, right? If they traded Matthew Judon at the start of the offseason, they weren't getting a third round pick. They waited until late in the summer. The Falcons had a big injury on their pass rush and other needs in the pass rush, and the Patriots had him over a barrel, and they were able to get a huge return. And so for Joe Milton, I would have just waited until that. Again, I know there was this whole talking point about they didn't want to have him in the room with Drake May because Joe Milton fancies himself the starter. But it's not like Joe Milton has the Patriots over barrel. I don't think they are in control of what they want to do with the asset. But with all that said, I was waiting to see what the Patriots would do with that in the draft. What would that fifth pick become? Do they use it to trade up into the fourth or something? Like, let's see. And ultimately, it turned into them getting, part of it trading down, and they got kicker Andreas, I can't pronounce his name, Borregales, long snapper Julian Ashby, and cornerback Kobe Minor, who was the final pick in the draft, the Mr. Irrelevant. Meanwhile, the Cowboys obviously got Milton and turned the pick the Patriots gave them in that trade, number 217, into a defensive lineman, Jay Toya. So essentially, the Patriots traded Joe Milton, who, say what you want about him, he was awesome in that season finale and clearly has starter upside. That doesn't mean he'll be a starter, but he has starter upside. Like, to me, it at least is as promising as Jacoby Brissett was back in 2017 or whatever when they traded him for a serviceable receiver. And then so to take that asset and have it become just a kicker, a long snapper, and the last pick in the draft, a cornerback, even in a best case scenario for those players, if you get a franchise kicker, a franchise long snapper, and let's say Minor is like a decent special teamer, to me, that's still not enough for, what the potential value of Milton could have been. Again, I know that they were worried about his personality going into the summer with him in the locker room and the whole thing with Drake May, but I just would have waited it out and seen if a team like the Steelers or someone else got desperate during training camp or going into training camp and pulled the trigger then. Because as it stands now that we see the return I hate the Joe Milton trade. I don't like it at all.
I'm glad you brought up the Jacoby Brissett thing because that was directly where my head went. Was they waited until cut down day and they got the Colts, and that was Philip Dorsett, right? It was Brissett for Philip Dorsett straight up.
Yeah, and a solid player. Like, I don't even know
who Dorsett was a great
right now. Like, let's say you traded Joe Milton for, I'm just throwing out like a Michael Gallup. I don't even know. Like, that's a bad play. That's a bad example. But I'm just thinking someone, a serviceable like third-ish, fourth-ish wideout. I'd rather have that than dart throws at kicker, long snapper, and the last pick in the draft, which essentially is an undrafted free agent.
So, we hear all this stuff about how Vrabel runs a pretty tight ship and all this, and we're worried about Joe Milton having an attitude that he's the starter when he was a late pick and they took Drake May number 3 overall, and he was obviously like, if you are trading a second-year backup quarterback because you're worried that he's gonna like wreak havoc. It's like, first of all, how did you not know this was going to be an issue when you drafted him? That doesn't just come out of nowhere.
Right. Yep.
And two, it's like that's kind of a commentary on your organization if you can't reel that guy in. If someone in that position is going to have that, and I mean, speaks to the issue they had last year. They had a different receiver running their mouth every week, and it was a different person who had no NFL track record. So I agree that it was bizarre use of the asset because the upside, I mean, this was a quarterback heavy draft and the class still altogether was very uninspiring. Like Joe Milton's upside greatly outweighs a large swath of the quarterbacks who got taken this past weekend. So I do
100%.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Dakota. Like they would have been better off waiting until the summer. I don't get what the issue is. I mean, it was poor use of that. The timing was just odd.
Yeah.
I don't disagree about the return for Milton. This is retroactive because I don't know that they knew they were going to come out with the specific players that they ended up with in this draft. But I don't think Borag, whatever. I don't think he's a flyer. I think he's going to be their kicker. And I also think that
Chad Ryland was too.
And I think that Ashby is going to be their long snapper. So I don't think that those are necessarily just like, well, late round throwaway, like we'll take a flyer on these guys. I think those guys are literally going to be the starters.
But so was Chad Ryland. right?
Yeah,
It is
no,
like my son.
so with what I'm connecting this to though is you're going to have a rookie, essentially an undrafted long snapper. Like seventh round is like that's deep. You're going to have a rookie kicker, and what's something that hurt them in the special teams game last year is holding and long snapping. The kicking was not great, but there were some situations where the hold was not down on time sometimes, and like it. I know it's stupid to say we're making a decision based on who's going to be the holder, but I do think there is something of having. Okay, we're going to have Josh Dobbs, a veteran who's going to be in there. I don't know whether he'll be consistently on the special teams unit, but I think that is something that could bring some uh, stability, maturity to that special teams preparation from the get go, rather than those two young guys having to prepare with maybe a part half the time with a Joe Milton who fancies himself as too good for this. So there's that. Going back to the Milton thing though, like the real thing with Milton, the Milton trade that made me go from being like okay to being like what is going on here is when they also had to give up that 7th round pick to get the 5th, because at that point I was like, well, now we're not even trading him for his value. Now the Patriots have essentially given up the bulk of this. Like they're
Dumped
not.
him.
Yeah. From that it went like this is not even a trade. This is like a love you, see you later sort of kick you out the door.
Yeah, and if
Yeah,
you consider that, you go, Logan. You go.
when that trade went down, Odyssey, my full-time employer, we have the Cowboys flagship as one of our stations. So I popped that on. They were falling all over themselves about the value that they got. Like they couldn't believe that they also got a 7th. They were like, they stole this guy from the Patriots. Like that was the reaction in Dallas in real time. Um, yeah, I mean, it I I think you make a good point, Ben, that it's like they took someone who entered last year as their number 3 quarterback and turned him into two guys who are probably going to start right away this year. Like even if they are special teams players, like even if they are guys whose snap counts are going to be markedly lower than someone who's, an offensive or defensive player, they still address needs. So I do think that kind of offsets the sting a little bit. I think that is one way to, put the Patriots spin on it. So good work there. But yeah, I guess that's one way you can kind of make your peace with it.
Yeah, and this is probably reductive. And this is a reductive way of looking at it, but like, if you just essentially because the 7th round pick for the Cowboys wound up being a defensive lineman, and the Patriots took a corner with a 7th round pick. So if you just take those as a wash, it's essentially Joe Milton for a kicker and a long snapper. And like, if you're a Patriots fan that watched that game, that season finale, and then you immediately went into a coma, and then you woke up this week and you said, "What happened to Joe Milton this offseason?" And someone said they traded him for 2 special teamers, you'd go, "What? That's it?" Like even if they're good special teamers, it's just like, that asset turned into 3 special teams players probably, and one of which might it probably won't even make the team. And Kobe
But
Manu.
we're also talking about a guy who we're looking at a one game sample size here.
Yeah, but I'm
So
sorry,
there's
like
it's
you
just
don't.
as likely that he's waived by the end of the season.
Right. No,
Um,
I agree, but you don't. I do. It was a 1 game sample, but a 1 game sample from a quarterback is different than like a 1 game sample of like a kicker who went out there and made like 6 field goals and a couple from 50 yards. Like
but
he went out there and basically in a start against a good team, granted backups, but a good team, and was awesome. So I'm just saying, like, you don't do that just kind of by accident for a full game. Like, it's hard to do that. Does that mean he can repeat it as a full time starter? No, but it definitely means something. Again, it doesn't mean he's great. Matt Flynn, right? Like Matt Flynn had good starts too, but I don't know.
I mean, Bailey Zappi, like if it, you can kind of take it there if you want, like I was never a Zappi guy, but people talked themselves into him after small sample sizes because he was a reprieve from Mac Jones.
Right, but Joe Milton certainly has more projection in him than
Yes,
Bailey
right.
Zappi. Like you looked at Bailey Zappi in those games, and you're like, this probably is the max of Bailey Zappi. Whereas you looked at Joe Milton in that game, and you're like, wow, what if he gets even better? You know, um, so I'm probably talking too much about Joe Milton and not enough about how the Patriots had to delete a tweet about Kobe Minor
Oh my
after
God,
drafting
I know.
picking up. I don't know if you saw that, Ben.
I did. I did.
Yeah, yeah. Tough day for a social media intern, probably.
I don't think it was an intern. I think it was
You're
probably
right.
someone who.
That's not an intern.
Yeah,
You're right.
I think the problem was it was not an intern. I think it was probably someone who was like closer to your guys' age, or God forbid, even closer to my age, that like didn't understand like the connotation of the reference and thought this is just like a silly thing to share. Yeah,
That people say. People are just saying A minor
right.
for fun.
Yeah, right. Precisely. All right, Logan, you're up. Give us your take on the Patriots 2025 NFL draft.
This might end up being, and again, human beings, the caveat you gave, this is as excited as I've been about a Patriots draft class in a very long time. Like, I think this has the potential to be one of their best draft classes in many years. And I think that is partially because that is not at all a high bar to clear, especially with the way they've drafted over the last decade, probably. Like, you really define draft classes that it's like, all right, they got more than one or two useful players. You got to really start going back. So I think that there is, I was harping all last week about like they need to build the team around Drake May. And I think that, that's why I was a proponent of Will Campbell. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink the arm length. Just draft the guy. I was surprised by the Henderson pick. I was surprised they went with a running back in the second round, but he's explosive and he can catch passes. Like, that was one of the things we talked about is with a running back, they need someone who can kind of complement the power game that Stevenson brings. So I thought that the decisions they made a lot of sense. I like the idea of just draft a kicker in the late round. Don't overdraft him like Justin Rohrwasser or Chad Ryland or whatever. And another thing, and they started to do this last year, and I'm not overly thrilled with last year's draft class yet, but they mostly just took guys from Power Five schools, which like I am fine with finding guys in Division II, finding guys on the margins, but it's like you don't need to be drafting somebody from Chattanooga in the first round. It's like you look at like let's go back to 2003. After you get past Oregon and Georgia Tech, it's Sacramento State, Troy, Eastern Michigan, Liberty, Jackson State, like schools that aren't known for pumping out NFL talent. I'm not necessarily saying, all right, well, they loaded up with guys from SEC schools, like they're off and running, but the galaxy braining that they have a tendency to do sometimes, I feel like they diverted from that. So, you know, it's a low bar to clear to have one of the better draft classes of recent memory, the Patriots. And I think that they actually drafted like high floor guys who will fulfill some needs. So go ahead, Dakota. I see that smirk on your face.
No, I just the galaxy braining made me laugh. No,
Is that not what they do? I
no,
mean, I like
100%.
Kyle
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Duggar, but you took a guy from Lenore Ryan with your first pick. Like,
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, that's a whole different conversation. You know, whether Bill Belichick's galaxy brain drafting can be justified, but um, I would just say generally, like many people, I like what they did in this draft. It's sure, and again, none of us know anything about any of this, so we're all just sort of guessing. But it sure seems like they went in there with a more coherent plan and really got good value with a lot of their picks. I mean, when it's so unanimous from like the real experts who like I trust, like Brugler and Daniel Jeremiah, like I put a little bit more weight into it. But what I will push back on, and I'm not trying to do the Felger Mass thing where it's just like let's just shit on the draft because everyone else is liking it. I've heard a lot of people say that they deserve credit for prioritizing offense, especially on the first 2 days and going into this and saying Drake May's the asset. We need to surround Drake May. That doesn't necessarily mean that they did a good job. I think people are forgetting that last year they only drafted one defensive player. They went into that draft, they drafted Drake May, and then the next 5 picks were offensive players: Polk, Caden Wallace, Layden Robinson, Javon Baker. 2 receivers in there, and then they took Dial and then Joe Milton and Jaheim Bell. So they very much prioritized offense last year too, and clearly, made surrounding Drake May a priority after drafting him. And TBD on most of that class, and the early returns aren't good on most of them. So I just think, a lot of people giving them credit for prioritizing offense and supporting May. I don't think that really is an argument for anything, because that doesn't mean anything if the players aren't good. I think what they do
I
deserve credit for is, going in with a more coherent plan, like you said, not galaxy braining, and it's seemingly finding good value with a lot of their picks.
I do think it kind of underscores the point that they just wasted last year, because it's like
You don't know that yet. I mean, you can't judge a draft class until after year three. We don't know if it's a waste, but I'm just saying.
yeah, I mean the early returns are not encouraging. Um and so my point is basically like, and I'll add to another thought that I have was, it doesn't surprise me as much that they didn't focus on defense, because we're not that far removed from that unit being really good, and you could make the case that Covington ran it into the ground, and the fact that the offense couldn't get off the field, or stay on the field rather, put that defense in a very difficult spot. So maybe you could make the argument that like this was a pretty strong unit for a while prior to 2 years ago. Like maybe let's see what we have there. Maybe there isn't as much of a need, because if Mike Vrabel's as good as getting more out of guys as he said to be, they also focus a lot on defense and free agency. So I think that you can justify, focusing more on offense, but it's kind of like, yeah, that's because you probably blew it last year. It seems like you might have blown it last year. So you have to go do it again and protect yourself.
Yeah, they drafted fewer offensive players this year than they did last year, even if you remove Joe Milton. So
Yeah.
just saying.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's funny, like you mentioned, like Henderson, and some of the positional picks. Um, One thing that I always like to note with the NFL draft is like that. Let's say you get the number one pick, right? People look at it as, okay, like you get the number one pick in the entire draft once. You actually get the number one pick three different times. You get it Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And that's like a real big advantage, that in three different cases you get the chance to step back, exhale, get 3 hours worth of sleep, on your pick, discuss, you're not, any changes there have been on the board ahead of you, like you get a kind of a chance to reset your draft board and look at it, um, y- you know, with a moment.
Yeah, you remove a lot of the guesswork.
Yeah. And so in this case, obviously the Patriots didn't have the number one pick. They had the number four pick twice. They had the number five pick once. If you look at it, breaking it up by rounds, by days, like that, and that was honestly why the two picks that like people were like scratching their heads over the most out of this draft, which I believe, so that was Henderson and Woodson, right? Those were their first picks on those day
Yeah.
2 and 3.
Yep.
That I was looking at it and being like, okay, I know that these seem a little questionable, but these were obviously picks that they measured. Like they had an entire night. They probably met, as a group for several hours and talked about what we were going to do here. And in those cases, they came out, whether it was a consensus or Vrabel's call or, Cowden's call, whoever, to take these two particular guys. So, you know, that didn't work out too well for them last year, obviously. But that is something that when I like look at the draft, I do look at like a a a player that like you're taking first thing Friday night a little bit differently than a guy who you're taking deeper at night on those days. Because I just believe that there's hopefully, at least I with this administration, I think that there's a little bit more of a research, a discussion, a debate, and a decision behind that than just saying, "Hey, we need offense. Oh, here's a running back. Let's grab him."
I would also say, you know, our final NBC Sports episode before the draft aged pretty well. I seem to remember us having a discussion at one point about if there's one defensive position other than edge rusher you could see them targeting earlier than people expect, would be a potential future free safety. So, and that's what Woodson wound up
That
being.
that was specifically your take. So if you would like
You
to
said it,
just
not
lead
me.
us down the path of complimenting
I
you,
was, I thought
I,
no,
I
I thought no, I think didn't you?
I
Have it?
thought you were. I thought you were about a corner, Ben, but I thought
No, he was a
the
safety.
specifically a free
Yeah,
safety point was driven by Dakota,
It
but
was,
maybe I'm
but I wasn't
misremembering
saying.
it.
yeah.
I didn't give
There it
myself
is.
the
So
credit
there's
you
the
did.
admission.
No, I'm
No,
gonna.
but I
I'm
wasn't.
actually see where did I think the guy though that I predicted they would take went too high for them to ultimately
Hey,
get.
speaking of going too high, how about Ozzy Trapillo? He wasn't even an
Oh
option
my
for the
god!
Patriots.
Oh my god!
Holy smokes.
We did have that right too, though, about them getting another lineman fairly early on. I mean, I
Yeah.
thought a double dip was in play, which obviously it wasn't, but wasn't soon afterward.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, two of their top 100 picks were offensive linemen.
They've taken so. I wish I had gone and done the math before this, but like they've taken so many interior linemen over the last 5 years. I mean, I have the reference in front of me right now. I'll do it quick. Jared Wilson, um, Leighton Robinson, so
Marcus
one,
Bryant.
two. Jake Andrews 3, City So 4, Antonio Mafi 5, Cole Strange 6,
Not even out
and
of 2022.
Jason Hines 7. So since the start of the 2022 draft, 7 interior offensive linemen they've drafted. And no
My
guarantee any of them start this season.
yeah.
Well, save for Cole Strange, none of them were like since Isaiah Wynn, none of them were first round picks. And so it's like, yeah, no
No, but
kidding.
some
You're
were third and
constantly,
fourth. Leighton Robinson
yeah.
was fourth. Jake Andrews and City So were fourth. I mean, those if you're
But
drafting a guard in the fourth round, you want them to play.
yes, and you obviously expect that of them, but I think it's pretty clear that in terms of being the most like plug and play position, like if you take an offensive lineman in the top 10, usually expect them to be like close to like a all pro level right away. Like that should be a somewhat
Yeah.
easy transition period. So the fact that it's like,
Regardless of
yeah,
where on
they've
the
been
line they
taking
play, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so it's like, all right, they've been taking all these guys in the fourth round, the third round, whatever. It's like, I get it. Will Campbell might end up being their most stable guy because he was a first round pick. Cole Strange, if you find the right spot for him and it might be center, is going to be one of their more stable offensive linemen. Like at a certain point, you have to stop trying to draft the skill player that you cannot actually assess properly and just be like, we need to get someone who's going to actually be useful right away.
Just one other note. I'm just thinking about this from an industry standpoint, or from a workload standpoint. Because I just remember working the draft was just hell, both the lead up and during and after. It's just so much work, and a lot of it you're just kind of guessing. And I'm looking back at 2017, and I just wonder because I wasn't on the beat then, but I wonder how the beat writers felt about that because it was the year they had 4 picks, and the first was in the third round, and all they got out of that year was Derek Rivers, Antonio Garcia, Dietrich Wise, and Connor McDermott. So I'm just wondering, like, how if the beat reporters liked that because there wasn't like any work to do, or if it was so freaking boring that it made the job even worse. I feel like probably the latter. Like, what a boring and lame like draft class to, do any sort of content
That's
for.
That's how I remember the year the Celtics drafted Robert Williams. I covered the NBA draft and I was at the Auerbach Center. It was like I think it was the first year that they had it there. And I remember walking to my car and it was like 3:15 in the morning. And I was like, the Celtics drafted one player tonight. Like they got one guy tonight, and it was in like the late 20s. And I have spent like the sun is about to come up, and I am like, and you're just cranking away, and it is, yeah, just a totally different experience.
Imagine
I,
cranking Antonio Garcia content in the wee hours of the morning.
I got two things. One, my prediction that they would draft a Jaden or a Riley. They did not. However, in the 5th round, the pick where they would have drafted had they stayed in the same position, it was a Riley, Riley Mills. So giving myself a half point for that because it would have been their pick. A Riley was taken.
Well, and certainly they would have taken him there too.
Exactly. Yes, precisely. So I was half right that they would have taken either a Jaden or a Riley. The other one is this was almost my take, but it felt silly to be starting with pick number 146 as my takeaway. Braden Swinson is an example of a pick that like I have to admit I know nothing about player evaluation because like if like whenever I watched him play, I was like, this man is certified beast. Like for LSU, like this guy is an absolute animal. Like he's got all the tools in the world, and then he's there at in the 5th round. And I'm guessing that there were character concerns or something with him, but that's one of those where it's like, sometimes I just have to be like, I like talking about this stuff. I like looking at it. I like guessing about what might happen. But like, if you just had given me no literature or evaluation or anything to look at before this, I would have been like, oh yeah, Braden Swinson. Like I've seen him. He's a first, second round talent.
I think about that concept all the time
Yeah.
of like there's so much content out there in terms that evaluates these guys that I think like if I was dropped at a series of football fields, like college football fields, I didn't know who the teams were. I was just purely eyeballing players. It's like, but in the mix were like legitimate NFL players. It's like, could I pick them all out and be like, yep, I draft that guy, I draft that guy, I draft that guy, and how close would I be to being right? Because it is easy to sit here, but it's like, all right, I can see, like, I trust people who watch football closely and offer takes on like first round picks or whatever. But someone who truly knows like a 5th or 6th round pick and be like, yep, that's an NFL talent. Like that is very impressive to me.
Yeah, I think with Swinson, if I had it right from like what I've read and even hearing him talk, it seems to be like it's a scheme thing where he really might not be anything more than an outside linebacker, edge rusher who just rashes the quarterback, and like he doesn't do anything against the run. He doesn't know how to cover it all. He's not like a traditional defensive end where he's going to have his hand in the dirt. Like he's just going to be on the edge rushing the quarterback. So he's kind of a one-trick pony. Like that, it seemed like that's I think what I've kind of read as to why someone like him slipped, because when you are kind of when you're like that and you don't have a ton of things that you do, it's got to be specific teams with specific schemes that are interested in you, and then you can start to slide. But like to your point, like it's the one thing he does really, really well. So you would think that he would be taken earlier, but yeah, I agree. Like draft is weird and player evaluation is really weird.
Yeah. You guys have any Shadur thoughts?
No.
I never thought he was
Other
going
than
in the first round.
do hope. I do hope that this finally ends Mel Kiper's career. I think it has to. I think
not because of the predictions, but because of his reaction to it on air.
Just the way he conducted himself over the
Yeah.
weekend. Come on, like it
Felt like there was personal interest.
Well, it felt like that. But even if there wasn't, and it was just his own true opinion and the way it made for such bad TV. I know they probably thought it made for good TV, but to have the guy harping on the same point for like 3 straight days, like I actively like there were so many times where I turned it on and he was still doing it, and I just was like, I'm not watching this.
Everybody looked so bad in that. He looked bad in that. ESPN looked bad in that they would like not get off of it and talk about the players who were actually being drafted. The Browns looked really bad. Like the shot of them, like Jimmy Haslam looked bad. Our White House press secretary looked bad. Like
President looked good though.
And honestly,
Oh,
like
stop that.
and like Shadur and Dion looked really bad. Like I don't have any faith that Shadur is gonna, like, people have been saying he's gonna use this as motivation and then now have a great career. I don't believe that at all, and I might be very wrong about that. But like, my camera always dies when I'm about to make a point. The reason I don't believe that he's going to like use the drop and the draft as motivation is because like his reaction to it was not like, well, I have things I need to address now. It's, oh, the devil is making me fall in the draft. And it's like, okay, you are obviously not taking any sort of accountability like this. I know it's the way his dad has always been, with this fake God crap. But like, that's like, you're just like, okay, I'm punting this. I'm gonna bring up religion to like deflect this off of my own shortcomings and the things that I did wrong. And I'm like, yeah, you're just not, you're not gonna improve because you don't think that there's anything you did wrong in the pre-draft process, anything you can improve as a player. Like, you're just, hey, whatever. You're a 5th round pick.
And
I mean,
like
this is the guy
probably
that was deliberately tanking interviews with teams he didn't want to go to. And it's like, hey, maybe if you took some of those more seriously, you would have gone on day two at least. But I I mean, I remember watching ESPN right before the clock started, right before the Titans went on the clock. And they polled the panel, which was Lewis Riddick, Mel Kiper, and Booger McFarland. And they said, which who are you taking with the first pick? Like we know the Titans are probably going to take Ward. Who are you going to take with the first pick? And Lewis Riddick said Cam Ward, and Booger and Mel Kiper both said Shadur Sanders. And that goes back to my point about actually evaluating these guys because it's like there are two guys who are considered bona fide draft and college football experts. And like I know we all have our criticisms of Mel Kiper, but those are said to be some of the masters in their field, and they were that far off with that guy, like that calls into question the entire process, and especially the agendas and how much they get taken by the leaks and whatnot. It's just it totally exposed the process. And to the point about ESPN, it's like ESPN needs to give up on the draft. Have they like for a while they had a 10-year run where the second someone got drafted, they had to talk about the most tragic thing to happen in that person's life. It was like right away, it was like, oh, they watched their entire family get hit by a car. And it's like, it doesn't need to be like this. You don't need to harp on that. And then you can't even get highlights of a guy who's getting taken 102nd overall because they're still talking about Shadur Sanders. It's like, Christ, do you guys have that poor of a pulse on what people actually want? Like, you want to hit the Shadur thing as he continues to fall on day two? Sure, go for it. But like, once you get to day three, some of that has to be a footnote. Like, move on. But they get so laser focused on these one things, and it's either tragedy or a guy falling. They did it with Jake Fromm a few years ago. Everyone knew Jake Fromm wasn't going to be a good NFL quarterback, and they kept panning to him as he kept falling. And it's like, guys, like do you have no insight on this? Do you have no backup plans? Like, can you only talk about morbid things? Is their whole draft process is awful now.
so am I guessing, Logan, you were not shedding any tears in the story about Jack Betch and his brother?
No, I that was literally one of them right off the jump. They're like, oh yeah, his brother died in the New Orleans. So is that what was New Orleans?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. And
Is it like
that's a
they
legit.
hadn't even
That's a
showed a
very
highlight, and it's
That one is
like
very
I get
relevant. It's timely.
yeah.
Like
it.
that one has to be in there. But I'm just saying, yeah,
Yeah,
I agree with you.
it does.
The heartstrings
Logan.
pulls
We
are,
we
Do
we
you have to
are
lead
we are
with
on
it?
the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have to lead with it? Is my thing.
Okay.
Is like this is the greatest like moment in the professional achievement in this person's life. Like, yes, that is absolutely part of their story. But unless these players are saying, like, I want you to lead with my dead family member, it's like I feel like the optics of that are just bad.
segueing into a different point. I would, to Ben's point, like I agree. Like it's not like when Shador Sanders drops back on third down and there's a pass rush in his face, he's going to be thinking about what happened on draft day. So I always think that that storyline is a little overplayed. Like, yeah, can it motivate you to continually work your ass off in the off season? Yeah. Does Shador Sanders strike me as like Tom Brady esque crazy in that regard? No. Um, so but I agree. I think everyone embarrassed themselves, like and at every angle of it, whether it was people like accusing NFL sources or executives or coaches who were like leaking things about the interviews to have like an agenda or that they were lying or trying to undermine them. Like, no, it sure seems like those people were telling the truth. Um, you know, not going too far down the rabbit hole, but obviously some of like a lot of the race angle entered the conversation, and then whenever that happens, you get a lot of bad takes all over the place. And then like you also got dumb false equivalences. Like I think it might have been RG3 who tweeted like, "So you're telling me that Johnny Manziel can go in the first round, but Shador's too bad of a personality to go in the fifth?" And I'm like, first of all, like, can we allow for this for a world in which the past informs the present? That that yeah, we learned from not putting too many eggs in the basket of somebody like Johnny Manziel. So I hated the whole thing, and the one thing I'll finally add is I'm pretty over the pearl clutching of people crying about the kid who did the prank calls. Like, yeah, is it a ridiculous thing to do, and is it a jerk thing to do? Yeah. Do we need to like crucify
That's
the
such
kid.
an unsurprising take from
I'm
you.
just saying, like it went over the top. Like there's just every person with a blue check mark feels like they have to tweet that there needs to be discipline for Ulbrich and the kid. That this is just unacceptable. This is like, I'm like, okay, like dumb thing a college kid did. Like everyone's gonna survive. We'll all get through this together.
Yeah, it's a shitty thing to do, but I will admit that I laughed.
If I was
And
in the room too when he did it, I would have been laughing my ass off. And
yeah,
anybody who acts like and like if Justina Anderson or something is saying like, if I was in the room, I would have put an end to this. Like, you would have. We all would have been laughing, and then afterwards would have been like, kid, that was a bad idea. But
it's so funny too that he was joking about being a division rival. Like he pretended to be Mickey Loomis. His dad works for the Falcons. Like
he sounded
that's
nothing
very
like
funny to me.
yeah,
This is Mickey Loomis.
yeah.
All right. Started strong, ended strong with this episode. Logan,
Nothing to sneeze at.
Logan, Dakota.
Logan is a cold-hearted piece of trash.
There's plenty of room for those stories. It's just like, guys, you have 60 seconds and you're going to pump it full of tragedy. It was the COVID year, I remember being particularly egregious. Like, I remember the 2020 draft. It was like they could not help themselves. Like, every single person, they were pulling up things from like the 90s. And they're like, guys, reel it in. Like, you can overcorrect in that way. You can overdo it.
We'll cover 2020 sports takes different on our mega cast one day between the two of you. You'll have plenty of time. I'll have to arrange for each of you to have like 90 seconds at a time to go back and forth. But anyway, Dakota, Logan, thank you very much for being with me as usual. Any and everyone watching, both of you, appreciate you spending some time with us. NPC Sports Podcast signing off. Later.